So, Chris, thank you so much for joining us. As you just told me before, this is your first time in Romania. And before we jump into some of the questions from the people in the room, I just wanted to ask you, how do you feel the vibe of the conference, of the event?
So far, is this on?
Yeah.
So far, fantastic. A lot of great energy. I love the stage too, and the way that you guys have done it up, and the speakers, and I've really been enjoying it.
Great. So, any questions from the audience now that everyone is kind of like up to date and probably saw the discussions with Philip before? Yes, please. And we're going to pass the microphone.
I don't know. Yeah. Okay. So I downloaded your app long time before and I kind of like played around with it. You know, you have like a chat there. And what I found the most interesting is that you have goals, right? So based on my age analysis, as a backstory, I've always been sick. I'm 23, but I have severe allergies and so on and so forth. So one thing that I'm struggling in my country is that doctors have the mindset to treat and they don't prevent. So doctors in the past, because the lack of research, because the lack of a lot of stuff, they want to find your diagnostic. They want to treat based on your diagnostic. If you go to a doctor and say, okay, my diagnostic is not that bad, I want to prevent it from going worse than it is, right? How did you manage to find the team that would help you prevent? How can you work with yourself to not become health obsessed of preventing things that would never exist in your body for yourself? I can repeat the question if you want, because I know that it could be confusing.
I'll start answering, and then if I miss anything, then remind me. So what you're talking about is especially true in the United States, which is this idea of sick care rather than health care. And unfortunately, that's the state of things in many parts of the world, where we're only looking to treat illness, but we're not focused on the prevention of that illness. And unfortunately, it also seems that a lot of it really comes down to us taking it into our own hands and financially taking it into our own hands. Like, for example, in the United States, where it's predominantly private insurance and not a socialized system, insurers are not motivated, and I was shocked when I learned this not too long ago. Insurers are not motivated to prevent you from getting some sort of sickness or illness, because even though it costs a lot of money, they kind of just push the puck down the ice, and they think you're going to have a different insurer and that they're going to pick up the tab rather than them. And so unless you can show some sort of financial benefit to them within the span of like 1 year, they're not going to invest in it. So that's really unfortunate. And so fundamentally, there needs to be changes on a societal level and an incentive level. But until that happens, we need to do it ourselves. And so I didn't mention this on stage, but part of the reason that I was really digging into a lot of the scientific research when I was about a decade ago was because I was personally suffering from a lot of fatigue and exhaustion, and I couldn't really explain it. And ultimately, I figured out what it was, but I went to many doctors and no one had any clue, and I had to self-experiment. And what I found out it was a few things. One is that I have a nut sensitivity, right? So it's a very mild allergic reaction to it, which isn't considered by most to be a nut allergy, but it's enough to make me very sleepy hours after I consume it. And who would ever think that, that would happen? The second thing was that I was deficient in iron because I was donating blood a lot. And every time they would test, they would say you have adequate iron, but they weren't doing a full iron panel looking at things like ferritin and the storage of the iron. And ultimately, I was deficient in it. So borderline anemia can also, cause energy decrements and so on. So unfortunately, it ended up being a lot of experimentation, and you're right, some people might become obsessive with it. And so it's very important that you're careful with that. But at the same time, if you have something that's really taking away from your quality of life and you know it intuitively that there's something off, then you, at least if you're my personality type, you do become somewhat obsessive about it until you figure it out. And then once I figured it out, then I was able to let go and be a lot more, balanced with my approach.
Yes, because when I'm struggling, it's again allergies. My friends know, but I'm not being treated just because it's not chronic yet. It's not acute. It's just happens. Sometimes it happens, but the same, I'm getting a lot of fatigue. And when I went to doctors, they go like, "Well, you're young. It's just all in your head." So it's a lot of mind games that I feel like doctors play even here, but outside of Romania, outside of Europe, it's kind of like a universal thing. And I'm thinking because of the history of doctors and medical care, because we had plague, for example, there was no treatment for plagues that killed a lot of people. So they have the mindset that unless it's not something chronic, we don't treat it. But I want to prevent it. I don't want my daily life to be impacted. So the thing that I've seen in your app as well is that you can track your goals and you can track the quality of your day-to-day life, right? And on that note, I think you have to take care of your brain, of your mindset, because if you lose your mind, you lose everything. That's pretty much it, right? So what I did not see in your app, or maybe I've missed it, is your mood. Do you have that or not? The mood, and like
Sure.
to track your mood and to track how you're feeling inside, not only on the outside.
Sure. So it's a great question. So first, let me say that this is the first version. It just recently launched. And so there's a lot of features in our roadmap that we'll be releasing. Sooner than something like Mood, we're going to be integrating wearables into the app, so we can at least see things like your sleep quality and your movement, and then more advanced metrics depending on the device that you have. So we'll start with that. But I think that's a great suggestion in terms of subjective perception and mental state, and how that might also, because your psychology does have an impact on your longevity as well, right?
It does.
And so we emphasize this, like supplements, which is what we specialize in. It's just one slice of the pie. We're never going to say that this is the be all end all of longevity. It's diet and activity and sleep and recovery, but then psychology, which associates or is associated with things like relationships and positive, non-toxic relationships. And being an optimist has been shown to have, whether it's causal or not is another question, but it's associated with longer lifespans and health spans, having purpose in your life, and so on. So all of these are definitely important.
Yes, and on that note, I've been reading like a book, not necessarily a book, but like an encyclopedia. And it basically says that you have to unlearn everything that you know in order to make a change. So you have to start fresh. So in order for me to make a change, like I mentioned with allergies, I have to ditch all my knowledge from before and build my knowledge like upwards. Not have like a level 1, have a level 0 or even -1 in order to make a change and change myself and change my habits. In order to unlearn a habit, you have to pretty much erase any memory you have of it, because we have muscle memory, we have everything. So that's why I feel like it's very important to play this mind role inside your app as well. Just a suggestion. Moving forward, are you familiar with Ezra, with the MRI technology that they have? Because you mentioned that you have blood work, they have MRI. They kind of like have the same spectrum of AI analysis and AI diagnostic, and they do play with cancer prevention as well, especially for young individuals. What's your opinion on that, and how are you different with blood work as opposed to MRI technology?
So yes, I'm familiar with Ezra. In fact, I met the CEO in San Francisco just over a month ago. There's other companies as well competing with Ezra, like Prolon and others popping up all over the place. I think ultimately who has the best AI and analysis of those MRIs and the best, highest quality experience and so on, those are going to be determining factors of who ends up doing the best. I wouldn't consider Ezra or Prolon or any of these companies competitive with us. Health is an enormous concept and space, and so we're specializing in the very accessible at-home approach to being able to slow down aging, and that's what we will continue to focus on. We look at companies like Ezra as potential partners where we can guide people to these solutions when it's appropriate for them. So, for example, if you're a 25-year-old with no symptoms and no history of cancer in your family, there's no reason to use Ezra unless you have money to burn. But if you're 45 years old and you have a history of cancer in your family and you haven't been looking out for your health that much, you might want to at least get that baseline and check and make sure there's no tumors or cancerous growths. That's quite different than what we offer. So we offer biological age tests, which is looking specifically at the methylation of genes. So this is known as the epigenome, which genes are turned on and which genes are turned off. And different genes will turn on and off as you age, but also based on different health statuses as well. And so based on that, we can then, with these algorithms, predict morbidity risk, so this would be getting a disease, and mortality risk as well. And then, as I mentioned on the stage before, we'll also have organ-specific ages, which will then give you more specific understanding of how healthy an organ is. If you think about traditional blood labs, you get HSCRP and interleukin tests for inflammation, and then you get your LDL cholesterol, and you go down the list of all of these things. And then doctors are just checking if you're in range, and that's a whole other topic of discussion as to whether those ranges are ideal or not. But that doesn't necessarily tell you how healthy the organ is specifically and the whole body is. And so these algorithms, when they have a massive amount of data, which they do, they're then able to then essentially tell you how healthy or unhealthy specific organs or the whole body is, which is, I think, significantly more powerful than just looking at a list of blood biomarkers that you don't really understand.
How you detect how healthy is an organ with your technology or with your app? Because do you do a scan? Do you?
So it's not with an it's not with our app. It's with the blood test Novos Age that we offer, and then with that with the methylation data, we're able to see which genes are activated and deactivated, and that corresponds. There's correlations to different blood biomarkers, for example, right? So, like if you are highly inflamed, certain genes are going to be activated and deactivated as a result of that, and so these patterns are detected, and then algorithms are devised to then be able to essentially give you a high level understanding of where you might be facing some health difficulties.
Okay, I see. Thank you. That was all for my part. And sorry
Sure.
if it took a long time from the Q&A session.
No
So I
worries, no worries.
appreciate it.
That's what we are aiming for, like very informed questions. But just to build a bit on that topic, you mentioned before kind of like the reaction of the insurance world and kind of like what you discovered. I'm curious, what is in general the reaction from the traditional medical establishment, and what was your experience? What were the pros and cons of your interaction there?
Do you mean my business specifically in Novos and how?
Your personally, but also for the business, like how do they see it? Are they happy to have healthier people or more informed patients, let's say, or how do they see this approach, or do they say, hey, you definitely don't have enough information as an individual to make these choices for yourself? Like, are they suspicious or are they supportive?
I guess it really depends on who the doctor is. So you have some very traditional, skeptical MDs, and then you have some typically younger, forward-thinking medical doctors who look at the approach that we take, and they're very excited about it. So, for example, just this year, we began reaching out to doctors and sharing with them our research, our approach, and so on. And now we have more than 300 doctors that are recommending our products to their patients. And that number is going to grow significantly in the years to come. I think that it's natural, and it's actually good for a doctor to be skeptical of promises that supplements make, because a lot of these promises are just unsubstantiated, and there is a lot of snake oil in the industry. But then when they see that we run laboratory studies, and they dig into the evidence, and they see the scientists on board with us and the medical doctors on board with us, then they start to open their minds up, and they realize that this isn't your typical supplement company. I can say confidently that we are the most scientifically advanced supplement company to have ever existed in terms of the way that we approach science, and we're more of a biotech than a supplement company. Typically, biotech companies never wanted to get into supplements because of the financial opportunity, right? So if you create a novel molecule, you can patent it, and that's the pharmaceutical approach. And then you have all this moat of protection around that pharma drug, and you can charge insurers, and then therefore in the United States we basically pay for every other country, because it's like 10 times the cost in the U.S. for a pharma drug than it is anywhere else, and that's their approach. And so my approach was, well, can we leverage a lot of the more advanced scientific testing that we can do at lower cost now? Like I mentioned, one of the things I'm excited about is our ability to do experiments at scale on animals at like a low cost. And mind you, when I say on animals, we're making the animals healthier. This isn't typical animal testing where you think of them experimenting with like a shampoo and causing toxicity. We're actually showing we're extending lifespan and we're extending health span. So we're bringing them to a better state than they would otherwise be. But by being able to do these experiments at scale at a lower cost, we're able to, first of all, work with a startup budget, right? We don't need a biotech budget of hundreds of millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars. And then we also file for patents on our formulations, global patents. So that is possible, but you need to, first of all, show that it's something novel, unexpected. People would not have, no one had been doing it before, right? So like if your combination is already in a product or on Reddit, or someone wrote a scientific paper about it, that's considered pre-existing knowledge. So we create things that no one has ever really conceived of before, and then we prove that the results from that combination are more substantial than anyone would have predicted, and then that's how you get a patent granted for it.
Interesting. Any other questions from the audience? Yes, please.
Hello, and thank you for your time and what you do. My question is going to be very short, actually, and it's based on science itself and what science means. For example, you talk a lot about you talked about academia. You talk about having your own team of scientists and conducting research. But research is something ongoing, and by that I mean that studies keep coming up every year, every month. Always. So what I'm saying is that while something, an ingredient, for example, was found to support, I don't know, heart health, or to lower your blood pressure, and was found to do that based on animal studies or even or placebo studies of, let's say, a sample of 1,000 of people, 10 years ago, another study may appear 10 years after and actually reverse this. What I mean, and my question is, how do you deal with that? Not the contradictions, but a new study that comes and overthrows the previous study, and this happens with thousands of studies. And the next scale of my question is... Can
I answer that one first?
Yeah, of course. I'm
Okay.
sorry. Yeah, go on.
So it's a good question. There's a few ways I can address it. So the first is, oftentimes scientific studies will come out and they will contradict the perception of a specific therapy, let's say. But then what's important is to look at that study, look at how it was designed, look at potential flaws in it, and then look at the body of evidence. And so this is just one piece of evidence relative to the body of evidence. So for example, if you take a substance that has been studied say, I don't know, fish oil, right? That's a controversial one. Fish oil has a lot of scientific evidence to show that it has favorable health outcomes, extension of health span and lifespan, and a number of short-term benefits and so on. And then every so often you see a study that says fish oil doesn't do anything, or maybe it has a negative effect. And then you have to question the methodology or potential flaws. For example, what fish oil were they using? Was it potentially oxidated fish oil? So in other words, that fish oil is very delicate as a molecule, the omega-3s are. And so if they have any oxidative damage, they can potentially cause damage to our bodies. And so that's like one very specific thing that might actually point to oxidated fish oil causing damage, but fish oil specifically actually is good for you. So that's the first thing, is just look at the body of evidence and then also consider potential flaws in that study. Now, if there's momentum and there's a lot more studies that then start to show that there's a negative effect from something, then you have to rethink things and reconsider them. But we saw this, I guess, with eggs, and everyone said, like, don't eat eggs, they're bad for you. And then they started to say, oh, actually, eggs are good for you for these reasons. The good thing is that, like, as time progresses, we get closer and closer to the truth, typically, not further away, as we have more and more evidence and more advanced ways to run studies and then analyze the data and so on. We are more likely to be correct, but we're never going to be flawless and perfect with it. When we formulated our flagship product, Novos Core, we made a point to only include ingredients that have been studied for decades and have been either in human biology, or people were consuming it for millennia in many cases, decades to millennia. So, take an ingredient that is like fisetin. Fisetin is a molecule that can have a favorable effect on cellular senescence and on neuronal health and so on. And it's found in strawberries. You would have to have about 100 strawberries a day to get the dosage that we have in our formula. But it's something that has been shown as safe. It's been studied a lot, and a lot of benefits have been shown from that substance. And then we run our own scientific studies, because what is key is that when you combine ingredients, they might not behave in an additive way. Sometimes they can actually have a dysergy effect, which is the opposite of a synergy. It's a negative effect by combining the ingredients. And that's why we run animal studies. That's why we run human studies. And that's why we also listen carefully to consumer feedback and hear, are people experiencing short-term benefits from taking our products? And overwhelmingly, we do hear people mentioning short-term benefits that they experience.
It's a great answer, thank you. And you actually partially answered my second question, which was about the animals and the experimental trials on animals. I'm sorry, maybe I noted this correctly. And I wanted to say that I'm a potential client, right? And I'm very difficult to convince, which is actually true, but no one cares at the moment. I don't look at animal studies because these are animals. Animals have different DNA, have different bodies, their biological mechanisms. Okay, they are the same to the core, but they are different from a human body. So what helps a pig may not help me. You do know about the transplants that you try to do, the hair transplant from a pig to a human. And it was a failure, no matter the noble cause. So my question is this: how me as a customer, as difficult to convince customers and being very hardcore on science, can you convince me with animal studies? And if I'm a customer that knows nothing and doesn't understand what you say right now about the cellular sequences and the synergy of the ingredients and all the stuff, how would you make me a client of yours? How would you convince me
So
to
you're
become
challenging me.
part of this journey? I will say journey, not to buy your product, but to become part of the journey, to actually be a recurring customer, to spread the word. Because if something helps me, I call my friend and I say, look, I tried this, my hair grew, it looks shinier, or anything like this.
So, all right, so I have to put the salesman hat on now, huh?
if
All
you
right.
wish.
So first and foremost, before we even talk about our formulas, I would suggest that you use our free tools, right? Like what's going to make the biggest impact on your aging is the guidance that we can provide for improving your diet and your sleep and your activity and so on. So start there. In terms of the formulations and animal studies and their relevance, I'd say, first of all, part of the relevance of an animal study is to determine if something doesn't work. So, for example, if our formula doesn't do anything in mice, which are mammalian, and their evolution is quite close to humans, though not perfectly close, but the DNA is very close to human DNA. If it didn't do anything for mice, it most likely isn't going to do anything for humans, right? So, and most companies don't actually want to do studies on mice because they're afraid that if it does show a negative result, then they really have to question everything about the product that they're selling. I can't say too much, but what I will hint at is that we have seen very significant results in mice. So. So that's the first thing. The second thing is what mechanisms are you targeting? And the question is, are these evolutionarily conserved mechanisms across species? So if it is, then that hints at it being something that is vital for life, right? Because not all animals have the same mechanisms in place. And if it is something that we see in C. elegans, the little worms, in Drosophila, the flies, into mice and into humans, then that tells us that this is something critical for life and existence. And so if you're then targeting that mechanism, you again add to the likelihood that this is going to have a positive effect on humans as well. But then ultimately you're right that we need to determine, is this having a positive effect on humans? And so we look at the evidence in a holistic way. We want to show as many proof points as possible because we're never going to have a perfect answer for longevity. The problem is humans live too long, and it is exorbitantly expensive to run a lifespan study in humans. Think about it. It would have to be decades, right? And so I wouldn't be able to give you an answer until 20 years from now, let's say. So that's not practically possible. That's where things like epigenetic tests, where we can look at your pace of aging or your biological age, come into play. We can look at different biomarkers and see, are these biomarkers, for example, inflammatory markers, have they increased, which would be negative, or have they decreased, which would be positive? So we can get all of these surrogates and compile those and say, this is the evidence we have in humans. And then we can also include anecdotes like subjective well-being and improvements in skin and other things that indicate that someone is probably healthier. So we get that from the humans, and then we can look at an animal and say, and look at this, we also extended lifespan. And then we can look at the in vitro studies of the different mechanisms, and we can say, we've actually targeted this mechanism or hallmark of aging, and we successfully reduced it. And so when taken all together, then it should leave people to feel confident that this is actually going to have a favorable effect. Now, we're never going to have an absolutely perfect answer, but what we can do, and it's essentially the scientific method, the scientific process, there's never a perfect answer in biology. In physics there is, in mathematics there is even more so, but in biology there's never a perfect answer. But we can continually strive to getting closer and closer to that by providing evidence across mechanisms, animals, and in humans.
Thank you. Great answer. I have one last question.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
We have time for one more question. We're already over time, and we have also a question over there.
So it's a very short one, and it's a fun one. But have you ever calculated how much the 1 billion years longevity will increase the world population?
No, so I haven't calculated how much it would increase the world population, but yeah.
There are so many companies that want to prolong our life, and this is a very noble objective. Which would be the sustainability long term?
Yeah, so this is a common question, and in fact, like when I say 1 billion years, I think it was McKinsey that is estimating us being able to add 35 billion years to human life in the coming decades. I think it was maybe by 2040, but not too far in the distant future. So yeah, there's a lot of questions about this. First and foremost, it's important to say that by extending the lifespan, as I said on the stage, we're focused on extending health span as well. And by extending health span, we are, first of all, enabling people to be productive members of society for that much longer, and they're not draining economic resources from society, which is a tremendous cost. It's in the trillions of dollars in the U.S. alone. So first of all, I think that's a critical consideration. And I'm maybe this is part of my entrepreneurial nature, but I'm an optimist about our ability to be able to innovate and be able to, for example, cut down on emissions while also being able to sustain a larger population. But ultimately, people aren't even having children at the same rate anymore. So in terms of a concern of like overpopulating, I think it's kind of misguided. Not saying that you necessarily meant that, but a lot of people do bring that up. And so, yeah, I don't think that that's a very real, feasible concern. If anything, we might be shrinking a little bit too much. And my perspective is the more people in the world, as long as they're cared for and they have shelter and food, the better. I mean, we'll have that many more Albert Einsteins born if we have that many more people on this planet, right? And it's that many more lives that people can live and experience.
We actually have more old, sick people currently in the world rather than young people in the workforce.
Yeah, it's a problem in most developed nations. South Korea is leading with that. They are below the replacement birth rate, and China, United States. The United States isn't as bad because of the immigration, but across Europe as well, Italy is suffering from it. Portugal, so.
Chris, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing this with us, and everyone, thank you for the questions.
Thank you very